I am trapped in a town that does not exist. Do not snatch up a pretty plot of land in Sunnierfield, no matter how persuasive the email from the fictional reality firm. Do not hop into your car and follow the road signs to the unimaginatively named Town of Sun. And if you make either of those mistakes, do not, I beg, make the irreversible mistake of entering this wretched place, for you may never leave. It is not a town that truly exists, so if you see that line in the sand separating Sunnierfield from the real world, you must drive your foot into the brake pedal. The ache from the whiplash will fade. You would experience something far worse if you were to step even a toe inside the borders of this town. Believe me, even if we do find the way out, I'm starting to think that it might not be the happy ending I envisioned. I've been here for a little over a year now. It feels more like 10, but time is a little pear-shaped in Sunnierfield. It moves forwards, but not necessarily in a straight line. All I know is that there remains some link to the outer world through technology, television, the internet, things which keep the residents of Sunnierfield happy, complacent, living in a trance-like state, unaware that they are trapped in this town. I envy them sometimes. Wish my friends and I could revert back to that state of hypnosis. But that would not, of course, result in a happy ending. Given the nature of this eternal hellscape, I doubt it would result in an ending at all. Sunnierfield is, at its best, strange. And the things which are more than strange, you don't want to go near such things. Those of us who broke the conditioning have learnt that. We have gained and lost, gained and lost. It's a never-ending cycle. The creature beneath this town, a town that already exists far below the dirt, continues to lure prey to Sunnierfield. It draws unknowing victims from all over the world. Sunnierfield can be reached from all roads, in all places. That is, however, the least frightening aspect of the creature's dwelling. Like cattle, Sunnyerfield's hypnotised residents are fed with happiness until deemed ripe and ready. Once we have been sufficiently fattened by a false life in this false utopia, the creature feeds on us, drains all joy through our eyes, and our empty bodies join the beast's ranks of blue-shirted cultists. A band of unmerry workers keeping the town in order. These want people bend any and all dissenters into shape. They make sure that the residents are not only happy, but mindless. And even in my deconditioned state, I feel it. I feel the pull of Sunnierfield. The urge to stop fighting and to give in to the happiness. I won't let that happen. I will settle for this existence no more. We stood outside the hospital room, eyeing Bob's sleeping form through the glass pane as doctors conducted checks. I consoled Mark. The man made his way through an entire packet of tissues in the space of an hour. Emmy tried her damnedest to distract him, to pull Mark's eyes away from the horizontal window overlooking the room, overlooking our friend, whose robed body spouted an entanglement of various tubes. Bob was alive, but he'd lost a lot of blood, and Mark's eyes repeatedly returned to his partner's phantom limb, the bandaged stump that had once housed an arm. "Where is Diallo?" Mark muttered, after Emmy had forced him to sit down. He's wandering around the hospital somewhere, Emmy frowned, pushing a bottle of water into the man's hands. I should go and check on him. Don't bother, he huffed. I need a break from seeing his face. That's exactly why he's not hanging around, I noted. You need to go easy on him, Mark. It's barely been 3 days, Harvey, the man growled, eyeing me coldly. I'm allowed to still feel this way. It's all his fault. It isn't his fault, Emmy tutted. You said awful things to Diallo in the car, dear. You need to say sorry. You need to tell him... Just drop it, Emmy, Mark hissed. I know you want to play mother or grandmother to Diallo, but just drop it. You're nothing to him. He doesn't care about you. He doesn't care about any of us. He's just some orphan trying to escape this place. And he'll do whatever it takes. He'll act at the expense of everyone else. He's just a kid. A stupid kid. Stop embarrassing yourself by trying to be someone to him. Emmy's eyes widened, filling with tears. Then our elderly friend shakily got to her feet and hobbled away. She attempted to hold herself together as she waddled down the corridor, but her pain was palpable. Not that Mark noticed. His eyes were fixed on the window to Bob's hospital room, as had been the case for hours. That wasn't fair, I said. Back off, Harvey, Mark warned. No, you back off, I barked in response as I rose to my feet. Blame a 12-year-old boy for what's happening here if that helps. But you and I both know what did this. What will keep doing this. Yeah. And look what happened when we even thought about trying to stop this thing, my friend said, wrenching his ferocious eyes away from the glass pane to look at me. You're right, Harvey. It's not Diallo's fault. It's yours. I told you that we shouldn't be doing any of this. I told you that we should simply give the creature what it wants. You know, it might not be too late. We should plaster on our happy faces and enjoy existing in a way that, all things considered, isn't terrible. Until we become like them, I whispered, nodding my head at nearby nurses with dead smiles and bright blue scrubs. Blank-eyed staff members who served not the hospital, but the creature below. I realised we were fortunate that the doctors had patched up Bob at all, rather than allowing him to bleed to death from his dismemberment. Of course, I reminded myself that our mutilated friend was still valuable to the creature. We all were. The beast could have killed us numerous times, but it still saw us as livestock that could be cleansed, fed with false joy, then consumed. And it would be a more fitting torture to turn us into blue-shirted husks, fated to serve the beast as mindless workers for the rest of our days. The rest of eternity, perhaps. Yes, that would be worse than death. Mark opened his mouth to respond to me, but a voice drew our attention. Harvey Wayne? Sheriff Grace Lawson announced. I twisted to face the middle-aged woman standing in the hallway. She had gained a few grey locks in her frazzled hair. Much like the other residents of Sunnierfield, Lawson had only lived in the town for a short while. But several dreadful months had aged her significantly. The lines and folds of her face told a story. A disturbing story. May we help, Sheriff? I asked. Just you, she told me. Somewhere quieter. I followed the police officer around the corner, and she stopped by a large row of windows along the far wall. For a moment, as I looked out of the glass panes at our town, I felt that old twinge of hypnotic delight. Endorphins, triggered by the green pastures of Sunnierfield. The pastures that were a lie, much like the dazzlingly blue sky. "It's a beautiful place," the sheriff said, though her uncertain tone did not match her words. "Is it?" I asked. Lawson frowned, frustrated that I would question her or the place itself. "Yes." I motioned a hand towards the corner we'd just turned. "Did you see my friend in that room? See what they did to him?" "Robert Gray," she nodded. "Yes, I am sorry, Harvey." "Don't be sorry," I said, glancing around nervously to look for blue shirts. "Just help me, Sheriff." "Help you?" Lawson asked. "Help you with what, Mr. Wayne?" I pointed out of the window. "Help me escape this town." She sighed. "Not this again, Mr. Wayne. I told you months ago that there is no—" "Yes, I remember. You didn't know why I'd want to leave such a perfect place," I interrupted. "Do you remember what happened on that day, Sheriff? When I came to you for help?" She frowned, clearly not wanting to remember, or bearing the part of her which did recall the mob's pursuit. The deranged townsfolk, clad in blue shirts, who chased me to the creature's underground hovel. "You told me that you didn't need to keep the order," I continued. "You told me others do that for you." "Harvey," Lawson warned, fighting to hold back tears. "I know you're still in there," I said. "On that day, you apologised to me. I remember that. I'm warning you," she whispered, fixing her eyes on the glorious fields which surrounded the quaint town of Sunnierfield. "Look at it. It's a lie," I said. "And I fell for it too. Fell into that trap for months, before waking up. It's a beautiful lie, but a lie nonetheless. The real me was buried beneath, but he was still in there. And I know—" "Mr. Wayne, I didn't pull you aside to talk about any of that," Sheriff Lawson interrupted, refusing to make eye contact with me. "I want to talk to you about what happened to your friend, Robert Gray." I clenched my fists and muttered through gritted teeth. "Good. Then we want to discuss the same thing. You need to answer my questions," she loudly interjected. "Tell me something, Harvey. What were you intending to do with the contraband?" "Contraband?" I asked, pausing. "You mean cobalt? What was inside the items you took from us?" The sheriff nodded. I scoffed. "You know, you weren't very thorough, were you? Cobalt is in so many things. Heck, it's probably even in this hospital. I don't see you overturning every room in this building to confiscate contraband, as you call it. You only targeted my friends and me. Did we strike a nerve? Did we get too close?" "I assure you that my officers and I played no part in the search of Emmy Ito's home on Monday. I leave such matters to the enforcers," the woman explained, the hair on her skin seeming to stand tall in the late afternoon sunlight. "I'm simply here to ask questions, Mr. Wayne. I'm here to ensure that you have learnt your lesson. However, I'm concerned. You talk about other forms of contraband in Sunnierfield. It would be, I think, a very bad idea for you to seek such things. I must advise against it." "Then you're no sheriff," I spat, seething. Lawson opened her mouth to respond, but she was interrupted by a quake from the bowels of Sunnierfield itself. Then the two of us, much like the other workers and patients in the corridor, were suddenly flung into the wall as the building tilted to one side. It was a seismic shift beyond anything on an earthly Richter scale. And I would later discover that I shattered the bones in my left hand as I attempted to protect the rest of my body from the fall into the wall. The lights in the building disappeared, leaving only the sun's dying glow to illuminate the hallway. Then, seconds later, green fluorescent lighting filled the corridor with a murky glow. Panicked chatter and scattered screams quickly followed, echoing around corners from distant corridors. And before I managed to continue reasoning with the sheriff, picking at the scab which barely shielded her faux happiness, the woman had scrambled to her feet. "Officer Myers to all available units," the sheriff's radio crackled. "Armed suspect on the ground floor of Sunnierfield Hospital. Request immediate assistance. Home is hurt." My blood boiled at those final 3 words. The shift in Officer Myers' tone. The way in which his reference to something named home seemed to change the sheriff's demeanour, undo all of the progress I'd made. She returned fully to the trance. "Home is us," Lawson murmured, amending Myers' sentence slightly, but sinisterly. That seemed to suffice as a "Roger," given that the sheriff started to sprint along the slanted corridor, barging past toppled people. She left me behind, stunned and massaging my throbbing left hand. But I didn't linger. I started to push forwards, supporting myself with my shoulder against the wall. What stunned me, more than the unexplained quake, was the change in the air. The fearful groans of the patients and workers I passed. Gone were the happy hypnotized faces. Everyone looked haunted. Everyone looked human. It was as if the tilting of the building, driven by whatever had shifted in the world below Sunnierfield, had woken the residents from their collective slumber. It was as if they had no idea where they were, no idea of what they'd been doing for the past year. When I made it to the lift, I found a dozen other people packed like sardines between the walls at the end of the hallway. They were forcing themselves against the closed doors, hoping to squeeze inside the escape capsule. The metal of the machine groaned, not under the pressure of the crowd pushing against it, but from the mechanism straining. The entire building was leaning by roughly 30 degrees, and the lift was shrieking in response. When the doors did finally inch open, ever so slightly, I realised that they had been opened by the people within the tiny box. They were trying to escape. The passengers were trying to escape. 3 sets of hands eagerly slithered through the narrow opening between the doors, curling firmly around the edges, gripping until the skin whitened, and as screams slipped out of the lift. The dozen folk waiting in the corridor started to back away, started to realise that this was no escape route. The mechanism released one final wail, a death cry, joined by the scream of one lift passenger who'd succeeded in pushing her head between the doors. Those of us in the corridor saw what would happen long before it did. We urged the woman to slide back inside, told her that she wouldn't get out in time, but she didn't listen. Her will to survive was too strong. She, much like the rest of us, knew that nobody inside the lift would outlast what was about to come. This was her only chance. Then came the snapping sounds of cables failing, and the lift plummeted. It was quick for the woman, her end. But that split-second impact left a lasting impression on the rest of us. As her neck was caught between the hospital floor and the roof of the lift, the lady's head, wearing a frozen scream, was decapitated. It rolled along the tilting floor, coming to a resting place against the wall. The hallway filled with the cries of people in the corridor, and the fading screams of the surviving passengers as the lift collapsed diagonally. Mere seconds later, there came the resounding thud of metal meeting rubble. We had been fortunate not to make it inside the failing machine, and nobody wanted to wait for the entire building to fail. The disoriented people beelined towards a fire exit, hoping that the stairs would provide a safer route of escape. And I was trying to form my own plan when a hand suddenly grasped my shoulder, startling me. "Oh!" I gasped, turning to face Mark. "Why would you do that? What is happening?" he asked, breathing heavily. I don't know," I said. "Where's Emmy?" Mark shook his head. I searched the floor, but she's gone. It's crazy in here. People are losing their minds." "We need to find her," I said. "And Diallo." "Harvey, listen to me. I didn't find either of them," Mark breathlessly explained. "You need to help me get Bob out of that room before this entire place falls apart. He's conscious, but he's weak. The doctors abandoned him. He needs our help." I cried, clutching my head as I looked around helplessly. "Did you hear me?" Mark asked, tone growing violent. "We need to get Bob out of here." I nodded. Then we turned on our heels and ran back the way we'd come, swerving around frightened people who were being corralled by a couple of blue-shirted workers. One of the soulless husks spotted Mark and me, but seemed disinterested. Once we'd passed by, I twisted my head to take another look at them. I wish I hadn't. The terrified people, who had enjoyed a few blissful minutes of freedom from the creature's hypnotic spell, were all standing with open mouths and bulbous distended eyeballs that had almost entirely slipped out of their heads. Blood trickled from their eye sockets in thick, endless streams. I screamed as their eyes pulsated, seeming to absorb some awful truths from the faces of the blue shirts. The reconditioning had started for the poor residents of the town, and my hope of the people uniting was dashed. When Mark and I finally entered Bob's room, momentarily escaping the horror, I was relieved to find our recovering friend fidgeting under the duvet. I was worried that we'd find ourselves hoisting an unconscious Hulk out of bed, and I wouldn't have fancied our chances of helping Bob down 3 flights of stairs without some assistance from the bulky man. "Oh, Mark," the patient groaned, clutching one side of his slanted bed. "We've got to go, sweetie," Mark panted, pulling tubes out of Bob's skin. "Ah!" Bob winced. "Careful." "Sorry," Mark said. "I don't know how much time we have. Are you able to get up?" The man moaned. "Oh, I don't know whether I'll be, You need to get up," Mark urged, starting to lift Bob by the right stump that once sported a full arm. "Oh, Harvey, help me." I twitched as the building moved slightly, then hurriedly took Bob's left side. Our wounded friend was quietly protesting, but staying would have been a death sentence for him. Fortunately, we didn't have to support his entire weight. His trembling legs, which hadn't been used in 3 days, managed to take fragile steps, thanks to the strain of his friends hunching under both of his shoulders. Of course, Mark had nothing to grab on Bob's dismembered side. He was struggling to support the man. I offered to swap, but I was met with a growl. As the 3 of us walked back down the corridor, I was relieved to find that the handful of brainwashed residents with bulging, bleeding eyes were gone. Thankfully, so were the blue shirts. The entire hallway was deserted, and the green lighting was failing, much like the daylight. As I stared out of the windows, I was struck by a realization. I'd never seen Sunnierfield look so grim. Never seen the town show its true colours. Something had clearly threatened the joy which kept the sky blue and sun-soaked. That much was clear. Following a painfully slow walk, which felt like a 4-legged race, we made it to the exit door that I'd seen people flock towards minutes earlier. "Do you really expect me to walk down that?" Bob groaned as we shuffled towards the first flight of stairs. "The whole building's toppling." "We'll be here every step of the way," Mark grunted as we slowly started to descend, straining to support Bob. The wounded man nodded at his stump. "Look at me, Mark, I'm falling apart. I don't want you to get hurt, just go ahead. I'll follow you and..." "Shut up," Mark ordered, picking up the pace. "Come on, we've done 1 flight, only 2 more to go." Bob cast a pleading look in my direction, but I shook my head. Mark and I weren't going to leave him on the stairs. Even if he'd been in fighting fit condition whilst encouraging us to run ahead, we would have ignored his request. I didn't want to leave anyone behind. I already felt a sickness in my gut as I thought about Emmy and Diallo. Felt some sick shame for not doing a second sweep of the floor above us. But I trusted that we would find them. "We will find them," Mark promised, seemingly reading my thoughts as we reached the bottom of the second flight. "Just 1 more level to go, and then we'll look for them, Harvey. We will." The 3 of us stumbled onto the ground floor and burst through a set of doors. Not into the hospital's lobby area, but hell itself. The tiled floor of the reception area had crumbled away to reveal the cause of the quake. The unnatural disaster that had undoubtedly tilted the entire building at an angle. In a gaping hole, beneath shattered tiles, there lay a tunnel stretching downwards into the underworld. The opening covered most of the ground floor and revealed a familiar horror. The fleshy mass that I had seen so many months earlier in its underworld dungeon. This mound of blue-shirted bodies formed a skin shield around a black substance. The real creature, hidden below a pile of its servants, arrived on Earth from a black realm, a place beyond ours. This thing was not ever supposed to cross into our reality. And on this day, whilst fighting for its life, the abominable mass had sprouted long appendages of wriggling bodies. These awful arms swung wildly, scooping up fleeing residents before they managed to reach the hospital's entrance. And the creature's tendrils were drawing horrible, translucent threads from the eyes of those victims, absorbing their happiness and transforming them into blue-shirted shells that would join the creature's shield. As I peered over the edge of the opening, the ditch appeared unthinkably deep. There seemed to be no bottom to the hole in the ground, no cavern, just an endless abyss, much like Sunnierfield itself. Before that day, I thought I'd figured it all out, thought I'd learnt this town's secrets. But the abyss stared back, with eyes that told me I knew so very little about this gargantuan horror.
Emmy!
I suddenly shouted, slipping away from my friends.
Harvey?
Mark cried, turning to see me running around the endless ditch.
Help me!
Look! I yelled, pointing at the reception desk across the hall. Mark and Bob turned their heads, tracing the line drawn by my shivering index finger. Sitting atop the desk, being pulled backwards by a desperate Emmy, was Diallo. He had coiled his limbs around a blue-shirted man's body, one I recognised as the receptionist who had greedily eyed us when we first walked into the hospital. And the blue-shirted man's body was disintegrating, turning into blackened goop that was floating in the air. I followed Diallo's hands to the worker's snarling jaws. The boy was ramming a glistening, metallic object into the man's frothing mouth, an item that I would later identify as a battery containing cobalt. However, the creature, in response to this assault, launched a violent limb in Diallo's direction. A limb composed of several women's flailing bodies, which knocked the child off the desk into Emmy's frail, waiting arms. I ran around the hall towards the pair. From one of the creature's limbs, built of a body that waved like an inflatable tube man, I was watched by a pair of blue eyes. Piercing pupils that once belonged to a person. The limb flew towards me as I lunged over the top of the reception desk, but I escaped its reach and clattered to the floor. There, I found Emmy being helped to her feet by an apologetic Diallo. "Wait!" I whispered, seizing the boy's arm and shaking my head at Emmy. "Stay down, both of you."
"I'm sorry, Harvey,"
Diallo whimpered, face coated in tears.
I wanted to kill it. I wanted to end all of this, but
You did a brave thing, I interrupted, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder before turning to the elderly woman hiding beside him. "Emmy, we need to—"
"Harvey!"
a voice bellowed. This time, it was Bob, not Mark. And as I peeked over the counter, the ground started to shake more viciously. My eyes found only Bob standing against the far wall, tiptoeing against it to escape the hole at his feet. Then I saw something else. In the air above the hole, clutched by one of the creature's limbs, was Mark. We all screamed in unison as we prepared to watch our writhing friend die. Prepared to watch the creature steal Mark's happiness through his eyes. He had narrowly avoided such a fate before. I didn't imagine he would be so fortunate a second time. However, the beast, moving with immense speed, suddenly let its limbs retract into the hole, taking Mark with it. The four of us who remained were stunned into silence, much like the surviving residents of Sunnierfield. The hole remained, but the limbs were gone. Mark was gone. Not dead, just gone. I sensed that much. And I wondered why the beast had not taken his joy from him in some grand, torturous display. I feared what that meant. Feared what lay in store for him.